With great pleasure, please join me in welcoming His Royal.
Assalamu alaikum. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're waiting to hear about my days in Georgetown, I can assure you that my lips are sealed. Anyway, my topic today is going to be about education in Saudi Arabia. And for us, it's a very important issue, as you can imagine. The kingdom, since its founding, has put education in the forefront of its activities. So we who have grown in Saudi Arabia within the last 7 decades have seen a veritable blossoming of educational institutions and opportunities that serve the entire spectrum of Saudi society. And when one looks at the entire history of school building from elementary to college level, one can only stand back in awe at how far the kingdom has come in meeting its core responsibility of providing its people with the chance to learn and reach for their dreams. In 1932, when Saudi Arabia was unified into one country, schooling was primarily the privilege of very wealthy families who lived in the major cities and were afforded this luxury. Very few people were literate, and education was only available to males. However, as the 1930s progressed, the country's founder, King Abdulaziz, began to show that he was keenly aware just how important it was to expand primary education in order to propel his nation into the increasingly competitive modern world. As a result, elementary schools began to be established at a remarkable rate, such that by 1950, King Abdulaziz had created an extensive program to establish schools, and by 1951, there were 226 educational establishments with nearly 30,000 students. 2 years later, the Ministry of Education was established under the direction of then Prince Fahd, who later became king. He expanded primary, secondary, and high school building to such an extent that there were schools in tents that accompanied the Bedouin tribes on their annual migrations looking for grazing lands for their flocks of sheep and camels. And through his efforts, the nation's first university in Riyadh, now the King Saud University, was founded in 1957. The first private university, King Abdulaziz University, was established in Jeddah in 1967. But 4 years later, due to financial problems, it was converted into a public institution. In the wake of these early difficulties, several decades followed in which Saudi society and lawmakers were reluctant to allow private universities. However, the idea was revived in the government's sixth development plan of 1995 to 2000, and the Council of Ministers approved re-establishment of private higher education in 1998. Stepping back a bit in time, with the establishment of the Ministry of Higher Education in 1975, the number of universities being built in the kingdom began to increase rapidly. There are now around 70 private and public colleges and universities in the kingdom, and plans are already in the works not only for expanding those institutions, but building new ones. Hence, private organizations at every level of the educational ladder were invited to enter the educational market, and the results have been extremely positive in terms of providing greater access and opportunity to students. The government has also been proactive about linking the private sector with both private and public colleges and universities in order to offer internships that link graduates with the labor market and increase their employability. From these institutions of higher learning all the way down to kindergarten, the Saudi school system serves both men and women. In fact, in 1961, education for women was inaugurated, and 2 years later, the first government school for girls was built, and by the end of the 1990s, girls' schools had been established in every part of the kingdom. Today, female students make up over half of the more than 6 million students currently enrolled in Saudi schools and universities. It is only that nation that makes the most of all of its citizens' skills and ambitions that is going to be able to compete in today's technologically advanced world. Saudi Arabia's budget dedicated to education spending has been more than doubled in size since 2005. Allocations for education and training programs in 2013 amounted to around 25% of the country's budget. In its recent development plan, Saudi Arabia highlighted quality of education, and I quote from that plan, as one of the main issues of concern to many people in the kingdom, whether engaged in education or interested in it. For assuring quality of education ensures outputs that can contribute actively to development. The Ministry of Higher Education is placing more emphasis to technical, engineering, science, computer science, and medical programs. The 2014 budget states that educational policies must work to improve the scientific and practical skills of Saudis in order to enable them to meet the requirements of the transition to a knowledge society. In one important development, King Abdullah has invested $12.5 billion in a bid to help the nation improve its science and technology sectors by building from scratch a graduate research university with the world's second largest endowment after Harvard University, worth $20 billion. The King Abdullah University for Science and Technology is located 50 miles north of Jeddah, and it is truly the crown jewel in the Saudi king's pro-education agenda. The student population is more than 65% non-Saudi. The president is a French scientist. How are you, sir?
Fine.
Thank you for being here. The student population is more than 65% non-Saudi. The president is a French scientist who used to head California's Institute of Technology, and the board of trustees is composed of distinguished academics and civic leaders from all over the world. This is a truly remarkable achievement that greatly helps the kingdom open up its intellectual horizons to the rest of the world. However, King Abdullah's creation of KAUST, as it is known, is just one part of his overwhelming belief in and support of education as pivotal to the nation's progress. He has quadrupled the number of Saudi universities to meet the demands of a growing youth population who wish to not only educate themselves, but also to do it in their home. In the wake of the terrorist attacks of 9/11, Saudi Arabia looked at itself honestly in the mirror and realized that it needed to make a deep structural change in order to address whatever forces had come into play into producing the depraved minds that undertook such heinous acts. That change has been profound, far-reaching, and highly successful. At the center of this change has been curriculum reform. Upon extensive review, it was discovered that there were texts in the national curriculum that failed to fully express the degree to which Islam is a religion of peace. We brought about a full-scale improvement of student textbooks to more accurately reflect our nation's enlightened principles. I know that there are those who believe that we have not done enough, but our efforts are continuing, and any advice is welcome. This reform effort also gave birth to an even more extensive campaign of improvement called Tatweer, which means improvement in Arabic. Such is the title of the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Public Education Development Project, a $2.4 billion program aimed at dramatically changing the way the country's students are educated. The central idea of Tatweer is to improve the quality of Saudi graduates who can help us face two of our core social challenges. The fact that more than 70% of our population is under the age of 30, and the fact that as oil revenues over the long term begin to dwindle, we're going to need to modernize, diversify, and expand our economy into new sectors, which will require extensive technological know-how among our population. The Tatweer education improvement also deals with raising the quality of the educator by retraining and testing to meet higher standards. It is run as an independent corporation outside the purview of the Ministry of Education in order to assure that it is conducted without bias toward the old traditional methods. Its goal is to produce smart, creative, job-ready Saudis who are not only more open-minded, but who are committed to help their nation face the challenges of the coming decades. Saudi Arabia has also dedicated great energy to the important area of vocational and technical training. Understanding that a technologically advanced society requires workers with very particular technical skills, the government has established the Technical and Vocational Training Corporation as the main body responsible for developing and executing vocational education and training policy and strategy. Through the establishment of colleges that specialize in technical and vocational training, the Kingdom hopes to raise the number of these higher education institutions to over 100 within the next 10 years. And these colleges are open to men and women. Another area of education that is being emphasized is the international cooperation and expertise that arises from students studying abroad through the Kingdom's Foreign Scholarship Program. Known as the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, this important initiative began in 2005, and because of its popularity and success, it has already been extended by the state through the year 2020. The government dedicates around $2 billion each year to the program that provides scholarships for Saudi students to attend universities in other countries. Each year, over 125,000 students take advantage of the program at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. When these students, both male and female, graduate from their universities, the Cultural Attaché's office, as an example here in Washington, holds a job fair for them. The office invites Saudi companies to come and interview the graduates and offer them internships and jobs back home, shortcutting the bureaucratic tangles that used to stymie these youngsters when they go home to look for jobs. The Cultural Attaché also offers prizes and recognition to those among the graduates who excel in their studies. I conclude with a look at with greater detail into the incredible progress we have made in the Kingdom in the area of female education. When this year's graduates were born in the early 1990s, only 10% of Saudi women attended college. This all began to change only around 15 years ago, and by 2006, 78% of women aged 15 and above were literate, compared to 89% of men. From kindergarten to 12th grade, 51% of students today are girls, and 59% are boys. According to the Ministry of Higher Education, more than 300 higher educational colleges exist for women in the country alongside universities, and women represent more than 56% of the total number of Saudi university graduates, and more than 20% of those benefit from the overseas scholarship program. Further, Saudi female literacy is now over 80% and close to 100% among younger generations. The most recent proof of the emphasis the Kingdom has placed on female education is the recent unveiling of the Princess Noura University, a world-class women's institution that accommodates up to 70,000 students. In such a short time, it is truly remarkable to see so much improvement in the educational opportunities to women. And to show the Saudi people's commitment to this improvement, I quote the words of King Abdullah himself. When we talk about the comprehensive development that our country is witnessing, we cannot ignore the role of Saudi women and their participation in this development. The productive role of women has been a definite result of the great investment that the country has dedicated to the field of education for all of its citizens, men and women. As a result, Saudi women have been able to earn the highest educational credentials, which have enabled them to work diligently in different fields. Saudi women have proven their ability to handle responsibilities with great success, whether through their principal duty as mothers or as professionals. And we look forward to women acquiring a major role in a way that will promote the interests of this nation on the basis of Sharia law. I end the quote. Ladies and gentlemen, Saudi Arabia has truly made great strides in its educational ambitions. Only seven decades ago, the vast majority of Saudi citizens were illiterate. Education was available only to the urban rich. There were no public schools or institutions of higher learning, and women were barred from the halls of pedagogy. Today, everything has changed. We now have near universal literacy, a massive public and private school program and system, hundreds of colleges and universities, and women outnumber men in the pursuit of education. But none of this has occurred by accident. It has been due both to the enlightened leadership of our kings and to the fact that Saudis at all levels realize what everyone must understand as we seek to lift all of humanity into the benefits of prosperity. That education is truly the source of progress. We're still in the beginning of our journey to a better life for our citizens. We still have social impediments that impinge on our ambitions, like the social ban on women driving. There used to be an equally impeding social ban on women's education, but that has disappeared along the way, as will, I am sure, the one on driving. Our society has put to rest the evil of terrorism, and we aspire to higher achievements. We will put to rest other challenges that face our young and ambitious people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Highness. We will open the floor for your questions. So we have about 30 minutes for your questions. I would only ask that you please identify yourself before asking your question, and I will leave it to His Royal Highness to field the questions if you don't mind.
Okay. Anybody for questions? Thank you. No questions. Please.
I'm Chris Steinitz. I'm a graduate from the center about 10 years ago, and now work at CNA Corporation, a nonprofit research organization. My question would be related, a topic that's related to education would be reform of government and bureaucracy, particularly developing professionalism among technocrats. There's traditionally a major problem in reforming government institutions, one that we residents of the District of Columbia would be familiar with here, that often bureaucracies and government entities are slow to change, and especially with the tradition of sort of a cradle-to-grave welfare state in which very often people were guaranteed work in the government. So what sorts of reforms are being enacted contemporarily, and could you speak to the challenges of preparing people via the education system to have a professional and technocratic bureaucracy?
There is an institution within the government called the Public Administration Institute, and it deals with bureaucratic improvement by training and internships and galvanizing, if you like, the capabilities of bureaucrats to provide advice and know-how on how to improve the civil service, if you like. This institution is manned by men and women, and it is in connection with other such institutions that exist in other countries. I think in this country there is a civil service institute of some sort, that has provided advice and been in cooperation with the public administration institute in Saudi Arabia, as we have done also with other countries. So as far as bureaucracy is concerned, that is where the mainstay of improving bureaucratic performance is done in the kingdom. No questions? Yes, sir.
Your Highness, Patrick Ferguson, also
Yes.
on the board. 10, 15 years ago, a very serious problem throughout the region was the mismatch between the type of education and the jobs available. How is this being addressed in the kingdom?
Well, it is not just 10 years ago, I think it is still there today. And the kingdom faces it, like many other countries, by devising ways of trying to bring together the graduate, if you like, from a public or a private higher education institution with the job market. And as I mentioned in my presentation, emphasizing the job skills of our students and surveying the needs of private enterprise for technicians and for administrators and so on is the thrust of where the kingdom is going on this. We also have great hope, and this is being borne out as we have more of them in our scholarship students that are sent abroad. And they're not only sent to the United States. We have them all over the world, and they attend, hopefully, the best institutions available in giving these skills to them. And as I said also in my presentation, job fairs are then held for these students to align them with the job opportunities that exist back home. But still, I think we have some way to go before we can meet the global challenge of the mismatch that has taken place. Nonetheless, I think we're on the right track, and the government has also put in place a program called Nitaqat, which is dedicated to not only government jobs but also to private enterprise on the number of Saudis employed by these enterprises, to help encourage the private enterprise also to employ more Saudis. And in that context, the government has partnered with the private enterprise and private capital enterprises in having training facilities for job seekers, half paid by private enterprise and half paid by the government, so that they can find jobs in the private industry. These are all still a work in progress. How successful they are, we'll find out, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. But the efforts are being made, and we don't think that we have achieved, if you like, nirvana in this effort, but the steps are being taken, and we recognize the problem, and hopefully we will find solutions. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Khulud Al from Saudi Arabia.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan. Thank you, Your Highness, for the lovely presentation. I also graduated from SFS. I won't tell you which year though, it's in the 90s. Maybe I just want to comment on the job market, because I'm an investment banker and financial advisor in Saudi Arabia, but I'm also very much involved in helping employ students who are graduating. And the government remains to be the largest employer that has somewhat average skills. But the private sector is actually the other way around now, I would say. It's very difficult to find enough jobs. I mean, the situation is anybody that graduates now, I'm talking about people in business or finance, we immediately find a job for them. There is actually, so the skills that are trying to go to the private sector are the few and the wanted. So I think that the issue of unemployment, although at face value you would see large numbers, but I think these would be the unskilled rather than the skilled and the people that graduated. We have a massive shortage, I think, in skilled people that graduate from universities. So I just wanted to comment.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank
Your
you.
Highness. I'm Professor Fida Adeli here, a professor here at the center. So I wanted to return to the question of skills mismatch, because there's quite a bit of evidence in the region and around the globe. Probably one could argue that we can't understand the skills mismatch separate from issues of inequality, both income inequality and regional, geographic issues. So even though we talk about the region as one sort of plagued by problems of skills mismatch, there are actually quite a number of students in the region who are really well trained in getting an excellent education. And there are a number of things about the ways in which education is structured in the region, throughout the region, and I don't have enough data about Saudi Arabia to know how that plays out there, that shows that the ways in which sort of tracking systems are structured in school are sort of continually reproducing particular tracks for low-income students or students in rural areas. And so the skills mismatch is one that's a bit more nuanced, right, than just sort of a general issue of students not getting good skills, but certain students are being trained, certain students do get good jobs, but the problem is that there's a larger majority that's not getting access, primarily at the K-12 level, so many of them are not even making it to the university level. So I'm just wondering how in educational planning in Saudi, if there's been attention to these kind of disparities and what kind of programs might be trying to address this kind of differential track within the educational system.
Yes, I think the government is aware of that, and so is private enterprise. And this program that I mentioned earlier of the partnership between the government and the private enterprise in funding training for job seekers to be employed in the private enterprise part of the economy is geared to address is geared to address this challenge. And you know, these private enterprise companies, they're not just from the big cities. They're from all over the country, from the countryside and from the big cities. So that's where I think the matching up of the government and the private enterprise in providing the training for job seekers, even in the outlying districts, if you like, or countryside of the country, is helping in this matter. But it's some way to go yet. And I think one of the things that the university and technical colleges that have been expanded to be placed in the outlying districts, in the provinces, has been to provide the training where the need is. So the expansion of the number of universities is because of that. Now in all of the provinces of Saudi Arabia, we have I think 13 provinces, you'll find universities and technical colleges for men and women in these provinces to meet the requirements of the youth growing in those provinces, so that they don't have to come to Riyadh or go to Jeddah or go to Dammam to seek know-how and skills. But as I said, we're still in the beginning of the road, and hopefully we can succeed in that. Yes, sir.
John Duke Anthony, with a view to expediting or accelerating the nature and the rate of internships for Saudi Arabians leaving the university or the technical training sector, what might be your views or those of your colleagues about requiring those companies that are bidding for government contracts that not to inspire them, not to persuade them, but to require them structurally to provide X number of internships as a condition of their receiving these government contracts, both abroad, in this country, Great Britain and elsewhere, and at home?
It's a good question. I don't know if there is any law or directive from the government that exists today placing that requirement. The young lady might have an answer to that.
There are some offset programs that have accumulated billions of dollars worth of amounts that need to be reinvested back. So they are working on it now, the Ministry of Commerce.
I know one example in the railroad projects that are in place now in Saudi Arabia. they amount to something like building 10,000 kilometers in a period of 5 to 10 years throughout Saudi Arabia. Part of the contract given out to any company in that field is to establish a training facility for Saudi potential workers on these projects. So that specific enterprise has a provision of the kind that you described. But I don't know if this is a general order on all contracts that are given out in the kingdom yet. But I think that would be a means of testing this idea of providing training and internship for Saudis as part of the contract that is given to either a foreign company or a Saudi company.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your insights. My name is Ali Dawd Mafi Nizam. I'm with the West Asia Council here in Washington. And my question has to do with the reference you made to the educational initiatives that you've undertaken focused on showing to youth how Islam is a religion of peace, which I think is a very significant issue for international security and peace today. And I was wondering how these educational initiatives are related to Saudi Arabia's peace-building initiatives in the region, and in particular, how this might impact ways of finding a solution to the currently horrible sectarian schism between Sunni and Shia that has affected millions of people in Syria and Iraq and other countries. I'm wondering how the vision that you outlined impacts Saudi Arabia's peace-building initiatives vis-a-vis the educational sector.
As I said, the curricula are being in the process of change, and when there are references within the curricula that would emphasize or gear towards such issues as sectarian difference or dealing with others and so on, they're dealt with and either taken out completely or the wording is changed in such a manner to make them more inclined towards the purposes of the religion and the culture in the kingdom. One of the important, if you like, headlines that has been placed on all efforts in the kingdom that have to do with not only schooling, but with preaching in mosques, with media coverage, public lectures, etc., has been King Abdullah's effort in establishing the Center for Cultural and Religious Dialogue in Vienna. In 2008, King Abdullah called Muslim leaders together in the holy city of Mecca in June, I remember. Muslim leaders came from all walks of life and from all countries, Sunni, Shia, and subdivisions thereof. They attended this conference, and he proposed to them that in order for us to be able to deal with other cultures and religions, we have to reach out as Muslims, not as Sunnah or Shia or any of the sects there. And he asked for their blessing, if you like, to reach out to other cultures and religions. And of course they agreed. And then he, the next month, 1 month later, he called his good friend, the King of Spain, Juan Carlos, and said, Your Majesty, I would like to use Spain as a venue for a meeting that will bring together different religions and cultures to discuss common issues between us. The King of Spain agreed graciously, and the conference was held in Madrid. And it included not just the so-called revealed religions or religions of the book, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, but also Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, any subdivisions of those were also invited. And they all met in Madrid, where King Abdullah addressed them and asked them for their blessing to take this issue to the United Nations, where he would make the proposal that a center for dialogue between cultures and religions would be set up. And one of the ironies about that issue was that when he called Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and told him the idea, Ban Ki-moon said, "Your Majesty, I'll be happy to hold a conference for that, but we don't do religion in the United Nations." So King said, "Well, what about culture?" And he said, "Yes, culture, we can do that." So the title at the United Nations conference that was held in November of the same year was the Summit for Intercultural Dialogue, leading out the word religion from the United Nations. And I think more than 65 heads of state and prime ministers and foreign ministers and all countries practically of the United Nations attended that conference, which supported the King's call to establish a center. And the government of Austria graciously agreed to be the place where the center would be established. And it was inaugurated in, I think, September 2012 in Vienna with the agreement of Spain, Saudi Arabia, and Austria. So there is now a living center for dialogue between religions. When it comes to the Sunni-Shia issue, again in 2011, in August 2011, during the holy month of Ramadan, again King Abdullah called for a summit of the Islamic Cooperation Organization in Mecca, where he put this proposal to them that we must have a similar center that we have established for religions to deal with the sectarian issues. And the heads of state from all countries, including Iran, which has, as you know, is the center of the Shia sect, but also Iraq, which has a majority Shia population, and other countries supported this idea, and now they're in the process of setting up this center for sectarian dialogue in the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia, near the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So these are the two headlines that King Abdullah has put to Saudi society. And what comes from education, from mosque preaching, from media in Saudi Arabia, falls into giving support to these ideas. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Your Highness. My name is Erica Vasquez, and I'm a first-year graduate student in the Masters in Arab Studies program. I really appreciated your presentation, first and foremost, and thank you so much for being here. You really emphasized the progress and the importance that has been given to educating Saudi women, both within Saudi Arabia and abroad. And I was wondering how you think that the guardianship system has affected the social and economic mobility of this group of educated women, and whether it affects their ability to apply the skills that they've gained through higher education.
Not being a woman myself, my answer would be biased, definitely, by saying that I really don't know. But what I can say is that women are being educated, and they are being educated at all levels, including in the scholarship program that we have for women abroad. And what I know that of the way the procedure goes, that when a woman gets her scholarship, she has to have a guardian with her to go and do that. By sheer coincidence, and I'll tell you, I didn't design this, one of my colleagues is here, Dr. Awad al-Badi, and his daughter, I think he's on a scholarship, if I'm not mistaken, and she's at Georgetown. So I will let him answer this question for you, if you don't mind.
That was the question.
The question.
Okay, I was wondering how the guardianship within Saudi Arabia affects the social and economic mobility of this group of higher educated women in Saudi, and also whether or not it affects their ability to apply the skills that they gain through higher education.
I think it's still early to see the impact because not too many get back to the country after their education. But I think, as I see it, some people are coming back and they are coming out to talk about the opportunities they want to. So they are actively engaged in that discussion about even their future. So, but still early to judge.
Thank you.
Let me just give you one example. I have daughters, and one of them works in Jeddah. I live in Riyadh, and she works for a university in Jeddah. And I, being her guardian, because she's not married, and nobody has asked her to present a certificate or any such proof that her guardian, like me, is okay with the fact that she works in Jeddah instead of being with me in Riyadh. So her mobility for work and so on has not been a hindrance because of this guardianship issue.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So much in education happens. Oh, I'm Jill Linda Hanley from the Washington Report. So much in education happens outside the classroom, and I understand your lips are sealed about your time at Georgetown. But I remember when you were the ambassador here, you had majlises inviting all the students in the area to come and meet with you. Can you recall any stories of the education that was happening between American students and Saudi students?
Yes, well, as you said, Danny, when I was ambassador here, we had a program, and I think the program is still going on. And the one who instituted it first, I think, was my predecessor, Prince Spencer, of inviting American students from all levels, and not just from middle school or high school, but also from university, to come and visit the embassy and discuss issues that they wanted to discuss with embassy officials. And I had a program of going out to schools on all levels to speak to students. Many of the scholarship program, the Saudi scholarship program, actually began to expand in my year of ambassadorship here. So I visited some of these Saudi students in their universities, and I saw how they interacted with their fellow students from other countries, Americans particularly. And it was wonderful to see. And they were members of the various clubs or sports activities or intellectual discourse that was taking place. And I'm sure on a private basis as well, they were invited to homes and to eat and share their experiences with their Americans. And this is what makes for a full-rounded education. One thing about Americans is when you meet them, they pepper you with questions on everything. And they're also immediately telling you their life story. If they're old, it's how happy they are in their marriage, how many children they have, and what business they do. And if they're young, you know what their aspirations are, and so on. So it's an easy exchange that they solicit answers to questions, but they also offer their own views on life. So it's been a great experience for all of us here. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Highness, for being here today. My name is Judith Krasankos. I work for the Embassy of Spain. So since you mentioned also the King, I was wondering if you would be open to other kind of questions, such as your personal experience as an ambassador here in the U.S. So my first question would be, can you describe the U.S. Arabian-Saudi relationship today to the whole situation in the Middle East? And the second question will be, since President Obama is going to visit Saudi Arabia next Friday, I was wondering if they are going to discuss the topic related to Egypt and the offer you made to give him $2-3 billion for arms, for Egypt to buy arms of Russia. So I know the lecture is not on that, but
Thank you for your question. The second part of it, I'm not able to answer because I don't know what President Obama is going to discuss with Kenyatta. I'm not in the government loop, as you know. But just a clarification, I've seen press reports that Saudi Arabia has offered Egypt money to buy Russian arms. I have not heard any official comment on that. So I would take those reports with a bit of care, that they may not be right. But the relationship between Saudi Arabia and America has been a strategic relationship for both of us. From when it first started in the 30s, and then highlighted by the meeting between King Abdulaziz and President Roosevelt in 1945 and subsequent. But it's been a relationship like all relationships, of up and down. And we've had wonderful experiences together, but also we had some differences. Those differences, if I can just mention an example, was during the 1973 Ramadan War, when Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries imposed an oil embargo on the United States because of her bias towards Israel in that conflict. That was definitely a down. If I can use another example of a very high level of cooperation and friendship between the two countries, was during the 1990 effort to remove the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait, when America and Saudi Arabia joined together in collecting the military forces to drive out Saddam's forces from Kuwait. 500,000 American soldiers came to Saudi Arabia and were willing to put their lives on the line in the defense of Saudi Arabia. So that was a particularly high moment for the relationship between us and the United States. I think one of the reasons why President Obama is going to Saudi Arabia is in order to sit down with the king and face-to-face talk about issues that they may disagree on. Whether it is on Syria, whether it is on Iran, whether it is on Egypt, whether it is on other issues that deal with the geostrategic area that we live in. And so it's an indication that the two countries can get together and their leaders can face each other and talk openly about these matters. And to me, that is a sign of the strength of the relationship between us. Yes, sir.
Thank you for talking to us today. My name is Craig Brown. I'm a first-year student here in the Arab Studies program. You mentioned the scholarship program, which, while it sounds fantastic, it seems to me that it's not necessarily the best things for Saudi universities themselves if the best students are going abroad. So are there any initiatives to encourage Saudi students to stay in Saudi Arabia, perhaps
but I can tell you that
social sciences and humanities?
I can tell you that all Saudi universities are full of students. There are no classes that are empty in the kingdom. And hopefully that, as you describe them, the best are sent abroad. We have enough best for some to stay behind. But I can tell you, because the King Faisal, the Al Faisal University, which the King Faisal Foundation established in Riyadh, it's a foundation I'm a member of the board of trustees of, and it's a privately run university, and the quality of the students that study there are the highest caliber, and it's a university dedicated to the sciences and to medicine, and so we have no lack of students coming to the Al Faisal University. In Jeddah, there is the Effet University, a women's college established by my late mother, and equally, there is no lack of students going to Effet University, private university. So while we're sending students abroad to study, the universities in the kingdom are equally filled with students who study skills and know-how.
Could I follow that up by, do you know the situation with the humanities and the social sciences as well?
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
a similar situation?
It's not just exclusively science and engineering. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Delal Daghafer. I'm a PhD student here at the Tumor Biology Department at Georgetown. And I'm part of the scholarship program, but I'm also part of a university back home. And there's a whole bunch of us that's actually on contract and sponsored by the university on the scholarship program to go back after we're done and to teach. So we're learning a lot and going back to teach, to gain the knowledge that we've learned and go back and teach back home for the future generations to come.
And that's why I asked Dr. Abu Mirshid to come to Saudi Arabia and recruit students like you to come and acquire their skills here and go back and teach.
Which it raises a question, if I may.
Yes.
Because as you describe the relationship between the United States and the Kingdom, I mean, it's an old strategic relationship, but it does get reduced to this one dimension: strategy, security, energy. And it seems that for the length of this relationship, these two societies are not very fluent, not too familiar with one another. And I'm wondering if you see these kinds of exchanges as one way of addressing that, because I think on both sides there's a lot of hesitancy on different kinds of mutual relationships.
Well, I do think that the student exchange program is an important contributor to going beyond the one dimension level of security and strategy and so on. But also I think the business community has been very, very contributive also to going beyond simply the strategic and the security considerations. Last year, in the last 5 years, there have been Saudi, if you like, I can describe them as Saudi business fairs held in various cities in the United States. I think starting with Chicago 5 years ago, and then on to Atlanta, and then Los Angeles last year. And more than 1,000 American enterprises participated in those fairs, and they connected with Saudi business community. And the result of that has been an increase in the exchange of goods and services between the two countries. I think U.S. is until today our biggest trading partner. China is catching up very quickly, but the U.S. is still our biggest trading partner. It's not just oil coming to the U.S. or armaments going from the U.S. to Saudi Arabia, but business, other businesses, construction, medicines, etc., education, and so on. So yes, you're right. I mean, this human exchange, I think, is very important to widen the circle of the relationship. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. We'd like to thank you, Royal Highness. Thank you for coming, and I would like to invite you to join us for a lunch outside, right?
Thank you.